I can't live without a man." The widow's confession shattered the silence like thunder splitting oak. Elena Ward stood trembling before the young cowboy, her black silk dress clinging to curves that respectable women were supposed to hide. Outside, rain hammered the Thorne estate. Inside, two desperate souls faced a truth that would ignite scandal across 1887 Redemption Creek. What happens when a wealthy widow and a penniless drifter defy every rule? Stay until the end and comment your city so I can see how far this forbidden love story travels. The storm announced itself with a whisper before it roared. Elena Ward stood at the grand window of Thorne Estate, watching darkness devour the Kansas plains. Lightning fractured the sky, illuminating her reflection in the glass, a woman of 32 years wrapped in mourning black that had become more prison than propriety. The silk clung to her shoulders, expensive and suffocating. 6 months. 6 months since they'd lowered Thomas Thorne into the ground, and still the town expected her to wear grief like a badge of honor. But grief wasn't what kept her awake at night. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 7. Each chime echoed through rooms too large, too empty, filled with furniture Thomas had chosen, paintings. Thomas had bought a life Thomas had built around her like a gilded cage. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the thunder rumble through her bones. "Mrs. Thorne," the voice startled her. She turned to find Martha, her housekeeper, hovering in the doorway with that perpetual look of concern that had become insufferable. "Yes, Martha." "The stock's been secured, ma'am. The boys have headed to the bunkhouse, but there's—" Martha hesitated, wringing her weathered hands. "There's a man at the kitchen door. A drifter, by the looks of him, asking for shelter from the storm." Elena's heart performed a strange little jump. "And you came to ask me, Martha. You've been managing this house for 15 years. "I know, ma'am, but—" Martha lowered her voice. "He's young, and with you being alone in the house, I thought it best to send him to the bunkhouse with the others." "The bunkhouse is full, ma'am, and—" Martha's eyes darted nervously. "He's soaked through. Looked half dead when he knocked. I gave him coffee, but I didn't want to presume—" "Martha." Elena drew herself up, channeling the authority that came with being mistress of 3,000 acres. "I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of deciding whether a man caught in a storm deserves basic Christian charity." "Where is he?" "Kitchen, ma'am." Elena swept past her, her skirts whispering against the Persian rugs Thomas had imported from God knows where. The house was a monument to his success. To their success he'd always corrected, though they both knew the lie in it. She'd been an ornament, a beautiful possession to display at county gatherings, to pour tea for his business associates, to smile and nod and never ever speak her mind. The kitchen was warm, fragrant with the beef stew Martha had left simmering. And there, standing awkwardly by the wood stove with a tin cup clutched in work-roughened hands, was the drifter. Elena stopped in the doorway. He was younger than she'd expected. 25, perhaps. Maybe less. His clothes were plastered to a lean, muscular frame, and water dripped from dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. But it was his eyes that caught her, blue-gray like storm clouds, and direct in a way that men in Redemption Creek had forgotten how to be around her. He straightened when he saw her setting down the cup. "Ma'am, I apologize for the intrusion. I was heading toward Dodge City when the storm hit. My horse threw a shoe about 2 miles back. Your housekeeper was kind enough to—" "You're soaked through," Elena heard herself say. "Martha, fetch one of Mr. Thorne's old shirts from the storage chest upstairs, and trousers." "Ma'am, I couldn't—" the drifter began. "You'll catch your death in those wet clothes," Elena interrupted, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. "And I won't have it said that Thorne Estate turned away a man in need." Martha scurried off, leaving them alone. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller. The man shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm Luke Morrison," he said finally. "From Wyoming originally. Been working ranches from Montana to Texas this past year." "Elena Ward," she replied, then added, "I was Elena Thorne. I'm widowed." Why had she said that? The words had tumbled out unbidden, and now they hung in the air between them like a confession. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am. Are you? The question surprised them both. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks. Forgive me, I don't know why I said that. But she did know. She knew exactly why. Because she was tired, bone tired, of the automatic condolences, the pitying looks, the assumption that losing Thomas had torn her heart in two. The truth was uglier, more complicated. The truth was that sometimes she woke in the morning and felt something shamefully close to relief. Luke Morrison studied her with those storm cloud eyes, and Elena had the unsettling sensation that he could see past the black silk, past the careful widow's demeanor, straight down to the loneliness that had become her constant companion. I think, he said slowly, that grief is a complicated thing, and I think most folks don't have the courage to admit it. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud that Elena flinched. The kitchen window rattled in its frame. Luke moved instinctively, positioning himself between her and the glass, and Elena caught the scent of rain and leather and something fundamentally male that she'd forgotten existed. It's just thunder, she managed, but her voice had gone breathless. Yes, ma'am. He stepped back, putting proper distance between them. But it's going to be a hell of a storm. Pardon my language. Martha returned with the clothes, her expression carefully neutral. I've prepared the guest room at the end of the east wing, Mrs. Thorne. Far from your chambers, of course. Of course. Because propriety demanded it. Because a widow of 6 months entertaining a young drifter overnight would set Redemption Creek's tongues wagging for months. Thank you, Martha. Mr. Morrison, you'll find towels in the washroom at the top of the stairs. Please make yourself comfortable. We'll discuss your horse in the morning. She should have left then, should have retreated to her own wing, to her own lonely bed, and let the storm rage outside while she pretended to read or sew or do any of the mindless tasks that filled her empty days. But she didn't leave. Instead, she found herself saying, "Are you hungry, Mr. Morrison?" "There's stew." Martha's eyebrows shot up. Luke Morrison's surprise was more carefully hidden, but Elena saw it flash across his face. "I don't want to impose, ma'am." "You're already imposed," Elena said, and was startled to hear something like humor in her voice. "Another bowl of stew won't make much difference. Besides, I haven't had anyone to talk to in—" She stopped, realizing how pathetic that sounded. "Martha, please set 2 places at the kitchen table." "The kitchen table, ma'am?" Martha's voice climbed an octave. "Surely the dining room seats 20. Martha, the kitchen will do fine." It was a small rebellion, eating in the kitchen like common folk. But as Elena settled across from Luke Morrison, watching him attack Martha's stew with the hunger of a man who'd missed too many meals, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for a very long time. "So," she said, "Wyoming to Texas. That's quite a journey." Luke swallowed, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, then seemed to remember his manners and reached for the napkin. "Yes, ma'am. I've been following the work. Spent the spring in Montana helping with calving, summer in Colorado with a cattle drive. Thought I'd try my luck in Texas for the winter." "No family to—" Something shuddered behind his eyes. "Not anymore. My parents had a small ranch outside Cheyenne. Lost it 3 years back. Bad winter, worse debts. My father, he couldn't recover from it. Took sick and died that spring. My mother followed him 6 months later. I think she just gave up." Elena's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "That's the second time tonight we've apologized for things we didn't do," Luke observed. He met her gaze directly. "Your husband, was it sudden?" The question should have been improper, should have made her bristle with offended propriety. Instead, Elena found herself answering with an honesty that shocked her. "Heart failure, or so the doctor said. Thomas worked himself to death building this empire." She gestured vaguely at the walls around them. "Cattle land investments in the railroad. He was 53 and still driving himself like a man half his age. I kept telling him to slow down, but—" She stopped, realizing she was revealing too much to a stranger. But Luke Morrison didn't feel like a stranger. Somehow, sitting across a kitchen table while thunder shook the windows, he felt like the first real person she'd talked to in months. "He didn't listen," Luke finished for her. "No, men like Thomas never do." Elena pushed her stew around with her spoon. "He had plans, you see. Always plans. The ranch wasn't enough. He wanted to be the biggest cattle baron in Kansas, wanted a railroad spur built right through our property, wanted— She laughed, but it came out bitter. He wanted everything except the one thing I could have given him. What was that? Elena looked up, meeting those storm cloud eyes. A partnership, a companion, someone who actually gave a damn whether he came home at night. The words hung between them, raw and dangerous. Lightning illuminated the kitchen in harsh white light, and in that flash Elena saw her own loneliness reflected in Luke Morrison's face. I should go, he said quietly. I've kept you up too late, and— Do you know what the worst part of being widowed is? Elena interrupted. The dam had broken, and she couldn't seem to stop the words. It's not the grief. It's not even the loneliness, though God knows that's bad enough. It's the relief, the shameful, terrible relief of finally being free. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her hands were shaking. What was she doing? What was she saying to this stranger, this drifter who would be gone in the morning? But Luke Morrison stood too, and his voice, when he spoke, was gentle. That doesn't make you a bad person, Mrs. Ward. It makes you human. Mrs. Ward, not Mrs. Thorne. He'd remembered. That small acknowledgement, that recognition that she was her own person, not just Thomas's widow, made something crack inside Elena's chest. I should let you rest, she managed. Martha will wake you at dawn, and I'll have one of the hands help you with your horse. Thank you, ma'am. For the shelter, the food, He hesitated. The company. Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. Mrs. Ward. She looked back. Luke Morrison stood in the warm kitchen light, his borrowed clothes hanging slightly loose on his frame, his dark hair still damp, and there was something in his expression that made her heart stutter. I think, he said carefully, that anyone who spent years feeling like an ornament deserves to be more than that, deserves to be seen. Their eyes held for a long moment. Then Elena fled. She made it to her chambers before the tears came, great gasping sobs that she muffled against her pillow. Not grief for Thomas. She'd cried those tears months ago, such as they were. These were different. These were tears of recognition, of longing, of a hunger she'd been denying for so long, she'd almost convinced herself it didn't exist. I can't live without a man. The thought came unbidden, and she hated herself for it. Hated the weakness it implied, the dependence, the suggestion that she wasn't complete on her own. But there it was, the ugly truth she'd been hiding even from herself. She didn't need a man to complete her. She knew that. Had known it long before Thomas died, when she'd lain beside him in the darkness and felt utterly alone despite the warmth of another body in the bed. But she wanted, God help her, she wanted conversation that went deeper than weather and cattle prices, wanted to be touched with gentleness instead of obligation, wanted to be seen, really seen the way Luke Morrison had seen her tonight, looking past the black silk and the widow's mask to the woman underneath. The storm raged through the night. Elena lay awake listening to rain hammer the roof and wind howl around the corners of Thorne Estate. Somewhere in the East Wing, Luke Morrison was sleeping or not sleeping in a guest bed that probably felt like heaven compared to whatever rough accommodations he'd been finding on the trail. She shouldn't care whether he was comfortable. Shouldn't be lying here thinking about storm cloud eyes and work-roughened hands and a voice that had spoken to her like an equal instead of a porcelain doll to be handled carefully. But she was thinking about it. All of it. Dawn came gray and rain-washed. Elena rose dressed in her customary black. She had 6 months yet before she could abandon mourning clothes, and went downstairs to find Martha already in the kitchen looking worried. The bridge washed out in the night, Martha announced. Tommy rode out at first light to check the damage. Says it'll be 3, maybe 4 days before it's passable. Elena's heart did that strange little jump again. The bridge to town. Yes, ma'am, which means our guest will be staying a bit longer if that's all right with you, unless you want him to risk the crossing, but Tommy says even on horseback it'd be dangerous with the current running so high. 4 days. 4 days with Luke Morrison under her roof. Of course he can stay, Elena heard herself say. We'll put him to work. The fences in the north pasture need mending, and mornin', ma'am. She turned to find Luke in the doorway, cleaned up and properly dressed in Thomas's old clothes. They fit him better than she'd expected Thomas had been, barrel-chested and broad, while Luke was leaner, but both were tall. Seeing another man in her dead husband's shirt should have felt wrong. It didn't. "Good morning, Mr. Morrison. I trust you slept well." "Best I've slept in weeks, ma'am, but your housekeeper tells me I'm imposing for a few more days. The bridge is washed out, yes, but as I was just telling Martha, we can put you to work if you're willing. I can't pay much, but food and shelter is payment enough," Luke interrupted, "and I'd be glad to earn my keep. What needs doing?" What needs doing? Such a simple question, but it opened doors Elena hadn't even known were closed. There was so much that needed doing. Fences that wanted mending stock, that needed checking a whole ranch that Thomas had built with his own stubborn will, but that Elena had never truly understood how to run. And beyond the practical needs, there were other things. Conversations that needed having, silences that needed filling, a loneliness that needed... She cut that thought off sharply. The North Pasture fences. Martha packed Mr. Morrison some lunch. I'll ride out with him and show him what needs attention. Martha's expression suggested this was highly improper, but she held her tongue. Luke simply nodded. An hour later, Elena found herself on horseback for the first time in weeks. She'd forgotten how good it felt, the power of the animal beneath her, the wind in her face, the sense of freedom that came from being outside the house's suffocating walls. Luke rode beside her on one of the ranch horses, sitting easy in the saddle with the natural grace of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. They rode in silence at first, letting the horses pick their way across rain-soaked ground. The storm had cleared, leaving everything washed clean and sharp-edged. The prairie stretched endlessly in all directions, gold and green beneath a sky so blue it hurt to look at. "Beautiful country," Luke said finally. "Yes." Thomas loved it. Used to say that every acre was proof of his worth. Elena heard the bitterness creep into her voice and tried to push it back. "I think he loved the land more than he ever loved me." She hadn't meant to say that. The words just slipped out, carried on the clean prairie wind. Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I think some men don't know how to love people, only things they can measure and control." Elena turned to look at him. "That's remarkably insightful for someone so young." He smiled, and it transformed his face from serious to something almost boyish. "I'm older than I look, ma'am. Life on the trail ages a man fast." "How old are you, Mr. Morrison?" 25, you... The directness of the question should have offended her. Instead, Elena found herself answering honestly. 32, though some days I feel ancient. And other days, she met his gaze. Other days I feel like I haven't started living yet. The words hung between them, charged with meaning. Luke's eyes held hers, and Elena felt something shift, something subtle but undeniable, like the first tremor before an earthquake. They reached the North Pasture, and Elena was grateful for the distraction. The fences were indeed in poor shape, posts rotted, wire sagging, the whole thing needing more work than one man could accomplish in 4 days. "This'll take a while," Luke said, swinging down from his horse. He surveyed the damage with a practiced eye. "But I can make a good start. Get the worst sections repaired so your cattle don't wander." Elena dismounted, grateful she'd worn her riding skirt instead of the more restrictive dress. "I'll help." "Ma'am, you don't need to..." "Mr. Morrison." She faced him squarely. "This is my ranch now. My responsibility. I've been hiding behind the excuse of mourning for 6 months, letting the men handle everything. It's past time I learned how my own property operates." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "All right then, but we'll need to fetch tools from the barn." They worked through the morning, falling into an easy rhythm. Luke showed her how to stretch wire properly, how to sink a post so it would hold, how to check the tension so cattle couldn't push through. His hands were patient, his instructions clear, and he never once made her feel foolish for not knowing. Thomas would have criticized, would have sighed with exasperation and told her to leave men's work to men. Luke just taught her. By noon, they'd replaced 6 posts and restrung 30 feet of wire. Elena's hands were blistered despite her gloves. Her back ached, and she'd never felt better. They sat in the shade of a cottonwood to eat the lunch Martha had packed, and Elena found herself studying Luke's profile as he chewed thoughtfully on cold chicken. "What made you leave Wyoming?" she asked. "Surely you could have found work there." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, too many ghosts. Every street corner, every building reminded me of my parents, of the life we'd lost. He searched for words. I needed to be someone other than the son who couldn't save his family's ranch. Elena understood that. God, did she understand it. Is that why you keep moving one ranch to another? Partly. He took a drink from the canteen they'd brought, then passed it to her. But also because I haven't found a place that feels like home yet. Haven't found a reason to stay. Their fingers brushed as she took the canteen. The contact lasted only a second, but Elena felt it like a brand. And if you found a reason, her voice had gone soft, dangerous. Luke turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Then I'd stay, no matter what anyone said about it. They both knew they weren't talking about fences anymore. The afternoon passed in a haze of work and increasingly charged silences, every accidental touch helping her over a muddy patch reaching for the same tool felt electric. By the time they rode back to the house, Elena's nerves were strung tight as new fence wire. That evening, Martha served dinner in the formal dining room despite Elena's preference for the kitchen. It's not proper, ma'am, you eating in the kitchen like common folk. What would Mr. Thorne say? What would Thomas say? Elena almost laughed. Thomas would have been horrified by all of it. The drifter staying in his house, his widow spending the day doing manual labor the way her hands trembled as she changed out of her work clothes and into a dinner dress. But Thomas was gone. And for the first time since they'd lowered him into the ground, Elena felt truly, genuinely glad of it. She came down to find Luke already seated, looking uncomfortable in the formal setting. He'd cleaned up his dark hair still damp from washing, and seeing him at Thomas's table in Thomas's clothes stirred something complex in Elena's chest. This is too much, Luke said as Martha began serving. Ma'am, I'm perfectly happy eating in the kitchen. So am I, Elena admitted. But Martha has very fixed ideas about propriety. We'll indulge her tonight. They ate roast beef and potatoes and talked about ranching, about weather, about everything except the tension building between them like gathering storm clouds. But Elena felt it in every glance, every pause, every moment their eyes met across Thomas's expensive china. After dinner, Luke excused himself to check on his horse. Elena retreated to the library, Thomas's sanctuary, and poured herself a whiskey from the crystal decanter he'd treasured. She stood at the window watching lightning flicker on the horizon. Another storm coming. She heard him before she saw him, boots on the hardwood floor, hesitant steps. Mrs. Ward, I saw the light. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Elena turned. Luke stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall lamps, and something in his expression made her heart pound. You're not disturbing me. She heard the huskiness in her own voice. Would you like a drink? He should have declined. Should have made his excuses and retreated to the safety of the guest room. Instead, he crossed the library and stood beside her at the window. I should go, he said quietly. Should leave in the morning, bridge or no bridge. Why? Because. He turned to face her, and the raw honesty in his expression took her breath away. Because I'm looking at you in ways I have no right to. Because every time you smile, I forget how to breathe. Because staying here, being near you, it's... He stopped, jaw clenched. It's not proper. Elena's hands were shaking. She set down her glass before she dropped it. And if I don't care about proper? You should. You're a widow. I'm nobody. A drifter with nothing to offer except... Except what? She moved closer, close enough to feel the heat of him. Except honest conversation. Respect. The first real connection I've felt in years. Elena. Her name on his lips was a prayer and a warning. I'm 25 years old. I've got $60 and a horse to my name. Your ranch hands make more in a month than I've saved in a year. The town would crucify you. Let them. The words came out fierce. I spent 10 years being Thomas Thorne's perfect wife, perfect ornament, always proper, always appropriate, always dying inside. I won't do it anymore. I won't. Thunder rumbled closer now. Luke's jaw worked, and Elena could see the war happening behind his eyes. Desire versus honor, want versus propriety. Tell me you don't feel this, she whispered, taking another step closer. Tell me I'm imagining it. You're not imagining it. His voice had gone rough. God help me, you're not imagining any of it. Then why? Because you deserve better. The words burst out of him. You deserve someone who can match you, someone with property and prospects, and I deserve to choose. Elena cut him off. For once in my life, I deserve to choose what I want. And I choose... She stopped the confession trembling on her lips. In the silence, rain began to fall. Soft at first, then harder, hammering against the windows. What do you choose? Luke's voice was barely audible over the storm. Elena lifted her chin, meeting his storm-cloud eyes with all the courage she could gather. The truth rose up from someplace deep and desperate, the admission she'd been avoiding for days, for months, maybe for years. I choose this, she whispered. I choose you. I choose feeling alive instead of merely existing. I can't... Her voice cracked. I can't live without... She didn't finish, couldn't finish. Because Luke Morrison closed the distance between them and kissed her with a hunger that matched the storm raging outside, and Elena Ward stopped trying to be proper and started trying to be whole. The kiss shattered something inside Elena that had been holding her together through sheer force of will. She gasped against Luke's mouth, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt. Thomas's shirt, but she couldn't think about that now. Couldn't think about anything except the heat of Luke's body pressed against hers and the way his fingers tangled in her hair, scattering pins across the library floor. Elena, he breathed against her lips, and it was question and answer and prayer all at once. She pulled him closer, desperate to close every inch of space between them. The whiskey glass tumbled from the side table, shattering against the floor, but neither of them flinched. Lightning flooded the library with white light, and in that flash, Elena saw her own hunger reflected in Luke's eyes. Then he stopped, drew back, breathing hard, his forehead pressed against hers. We can't, he said, and his voice was rough with want. Elena, we can't do this. Not like this. Why not? She was shaking her whole body alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Luke, please. Because you deserve better than a fumble in the dark driven by loneliness. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones with devastating gentleness. Because tomorrow you might regret this, and I couldn't bear that. Because... He closed his eyes. Because I'm already half in love with you, and if we do this now, rushed and desperate, it'll feel like just another thing you had to settle for. The words hit Elena like cold water. Half in love with you. The confession hung between them, terrifying and exhilarating. I'm not settling, she whispered. Luke, I'm choosing. For the first time in my life, I'm actually choosing. Then choose in the daylight. He stepped back, and the loss of his warmth felt like abandonment. Choose when you're certain, when you've had time to think about what it means. What it means, Elena's voice climbed. It means scandal. It means the town will call me a whore. It means Sarah Whitlock and her knitting circle will have enough gossip to last them years. I know exactly what it means, and I don't care. You say that now, don't. She cut him off sharply. Don't you dare tell me what I feel or what I'll regret. I've had enough of men making decisions for me, even when they think it's for my own good. Luke flinched as if she'd struck him. That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? Elena's anger was rising, fueled by frustration and denied desire. You're deciding that I'm not ready, that I don't know my own mind, that I need time to think, just like Thomas used to decide which parties I'd attend, which friends were suitable, which opinions I was allowed to express. That's not fair. No. Elena's voice cracked. What's not fair is finally feeling something real and having it taken away because you've decided to be noble. They stood facing each other across the broken glass, breathing hard. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, something equally violent was happening to Elena's carefully constructed world. Luke's jaw tightened. I should go to bed. We both should. Of course. Elena wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. Propriety must be maintained. Elena. Good night, Mr. Morrison. The formality was a slap, and they both knew it. Luke's face shuddered. He gave her a stiff nod and walked out, his boots crunching on broken glass. Elena stood alone in the library, shaking with rage and want, and something that felt dangerously close to heartbreak. She'd been a fool, had thrown herself at a man who clearly saw her as just another wealthy widow looking for comfort, had mistaken kindness for attraction, conversation for connection. She sank into Thomas's leather chair and let the tears come. Morning arrived with cruel brightness. Elena woke red-eyed and exhausted, having barely slept. She dressed mechanically, pinning her hair with hands that still trembled. In the mirror, she looked like exactly what the town thought she was, a woman in mourning, pale and drawn, trapped in black silk. Downstairs, Martha was already bustling about the kitchen. "Mr. Morrison's been up since dawn, ma'am. Took his breakfast in the bunkhouse with the hands. Said he'd be working on the north pasture again today." Relief and disappointment warred in Elena's chest. At least she wouldn't have to face him across the breakfast table, wouldn't have to endure polite conversation while her insides churned with humiliation. "Fine. I'll be in the study reviewing the accounts." But she couldn't focus. The numbers blurred on the page, and all she could think about was Luke's mouth on hers, his hands in her hair, the way he'd looked at her before pulling away. "Half in love with you." Had he meant it? Or was it just something men said in the heat of the moment? By noon, she couldn't stand it anymore. She changed into her riding clothes and saddled her mare herself, ignoring Martha's protests. She needed to ride to feel the wind in her face, to remember that she was still alive, still free, even if that freedom felt like drowning. She rode hard across the prairie, letting the horse run until they were both breathless. The sun beat down impossibly bright after the storm. The land stretched endlessly beautiful and indifferent to human drama. Out here, it didn't matter that she was Thomas Thorne's widow or that she'd kissed a drifter in her dead husband's library. Out here, she was just Elena, and that was enough. She didn't realize where she was going until she found herself at the cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch. Thomas's grave was marked by an expensive marble headstone, the biggest in the cemetery naturally. Elena dismounted and stood looking at it. "You'd be ashamed of me," she said aloud, "making a fool of myself over a cowboy young enough to be... well, not your son, but close enough to be improper." The headstone offered no response. Elena sat down in the grass, not caring that it would stain her riding skirt. "The truth is, Thomas, I don't think you ever really knew me. You loved the idea of me, beautiful, proper Elena, who looked perfect on your arm. But the woman inside..." She laughed bitterly. "You never wanted to meet her, never wanted to know what I thought or felt or dreamed about. And I let you. I let you treat me like a particularly fine piece of furniture for 10 years. A meadowlark sang somewhere nearby. The sound was achingly sweet. "I'm not sure I ever loved you," Elena continued. "I tried. God knows I tried. But you can't love someone who doesn't see you, and you never saw me, Thomas, not really." "Ma'am." Elena jumped, spinning around. Luke stood a few yards away, holding his hat in his hands. He looked uncertain, almost afraid. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I saw you ride out, wanted to make sure you were all right. I didn't mean to intrude. How long have you been standing there?" "Just arrived." He shifted his weight. "Should I go?" Elena looked at him, this young man with his storm cloud eyes and his rough hands and his devastating honesty. Then she looked back at Thomas's grave. "No," she said finally. "Stay." Luke moved closer, but kept a respectful distance. He stood looking at the headstone, and Elena wondered what he saw. Just another rich man's monument. Or something more. "Did you love him?" Luke asked quietly. "I thought I did. In the beginning." Elena picked at the grass. "I was 22. He was 43, successful, handsome, in a severe kind of way. My father was thrilled Thomas Thorne proposing to his daughter. It was a good match, practical. But not happy. Not unhappy exactly. Just empty." She looked up at Luke. "Do you know what it's like to lie beside someone every night and feel completely alone?" Something flickered in Luke's eyes. Pain recognition. "My parents were like that toward the end. After we lost the ranch, they were in the same room but miles apart. My father with his shame, my mother with her grief. They forgot how to reach each other." Elena stood brushing grass from her skirt. "Last night..." "I'm sorry," Luke interrupted. "I shouldn't have kissed you, shouldn't have..." "Stop apologizing." Elena cut him off, her voice sharp. Do you regret it? No, God, no. He took a step closer. But you were right. I was making decisions for you, assuming I knew what was best, and that's not respecting you the way you deserve. Then respect this. Elena met his gaze steadily. I'm a grown woman, Luke. I know my own mind, and what I said last night I meant. All of it. Even the part about not being able to live without, especially that part. She took a breath. Not because I'm weak or dependent, but because I spent 10 years barely surviving, and now I want to live, really live. And when I'm with you, I remember what that feels like. Luke closed the distance between them. Up here on the hill, with Thomas's grave behind them and the whole prairie spread out below, he took her hand. The town's going to tear you apart, he said. You know that, right, the widow and the drifter. They'll make your life hell. Let them try. Elena squeezed his fingers. I'm stronger than I look. I know you are. His thumb traced circles on her palm. That's part of what terrifies me. They stood like that for a long moment, hands linked while the wind swept across the grass. Then Luke raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Come on, he said. Let's get back before Martha sends out a search party. They rode back side by side, not touching but connected by something stronger than physical contact. The ranch buildings came into view, sun glinting off the barn's tin roof. Elena felt something shift in her chest, a sense of coming home, not to a place but to herself. But as they approached the main house, Elena saw a carriage in the drive. An expensive carriage she recognized immediately. Her stomach dropped. Company, Luke observed. Sarah Whitlock. Elena's voice was flat. Thomas's cousin. And the town's most dedicated gossip. Luke glanced at her. Want me to make myself scarce? No. Elena squared her shoulders. You're an employee. You have every right to be here. But she knew how it would look, the two of them riding in together, Elena's cheeks flushed from sun and wind and something more. Sarah would note every detail, turn it over in her mind like a jeweler examining a suspicious gem. Sarah was waiting in the parlor, perched on the edge of the settee like a bird of prey. She was 45, thin as a rail, with sharp features that made Elena think of a hawk. Her black dress marked her as a fellow mourner. Her husband had died 2 years previous, but unlike Elena, Sarah seemed to relish her widow status. Elena, darling. Sarah stood, arms outstretched. You look positively flushed. I hope you're not overdoing things. The embrace was brief and cold. Elena pulled back, painfully aware of her riding clothes, her wind-tangled hair. Sarah, this is unexpected. I was nearby visiting the Hendersons and thought I'd stop in. Sarah's eyes were already cataloging everything, the grass stains on Elena's skirt, the color in her cheeks. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. I was just out riding, inspecting the property. Alone? Sarah's eyebrows climbed. Is that wise? A woman in your position? I had company. Elena met her gaze steadily. One of the ranch hands rode with me to check the fences. How thoughtful. Sarah's smile didn't reach her eyes. Though I'm surprised you still have hands willing to work here. I heard half the crew left after Thomas's death. Weren't sure if you could keep the ranch running. The barb hit its mark. Elena felt her temper stir. The ranch is doing fine, Sarah. Better than fine, actually. We had an excellent calf crop this spring. Did you? How wonderful. Sarah settled back onto the settee. Of course, everyone in town worries about you out here all alone. A woman trying to run a ranch by herself, it's not natural. You should consider selling, moving to town. I know several gentlemen who'd be happy to take the burden off your hands. I'm not selling. But darling, what do you know about ranching? Thomas handled everything. Without him, I'm learning. Elena's voice was steel. This is my home, Sarah. My property. I'm not giving it up. Sarah's lips thinned. Well, if you're determined to stay, you should at least consider remarrying. Calvin Hensley was asking after you just last week. He'd make an excellent match, well established, a good name. Calvin Hensley. The rancher whose land bordered hers to the east. He'd proposed to Elena years ago before Thomas, and had never quite forgiven her for choosing someone else. I'm not interested in Calvin Hensley. But why not? He's been quite patient waiting a respectable mourning period. 6 months is long enough, really. People would understand. Sarah. Elena cut her off. I appreciate your concern, but my personal life is not up for discussion. I'm only thinking of your reputation, dear. Sarah's voice dripped false sympathy. People talk, especially about widows who isolate themselves. It's not healthy. Martha appeared with tea, and Elena had never been more grateful for the interruption. They made stilted conversation while Sarah's eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail. Elena could practically see her composing the report she'd deliver to the town's other gossips. Finally, mercifully, Sarah prepared to leave. But as Elena walked her to the door, Sarah leaned in close. I saw a young man in the yard, she murmured. Dark hair, quite handsome. Is he new? Elena's heart thudded. A drifter who needed work. Temporary hire. I see. Sarah's eyes glittered. Well, do be careful, dear. You know how people talk. A widow and a young hired hand. Well, it wouldn't look proper. Good afternoon, Sarah. Elena closed the door before her temper got the better of her. She leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the window, she watched Sarah's carriage roll away, kicking up dust. Martha appeared in the hallway. That woman's poison, she muttered. Always has been. She suspects something. Let her suspect. You've done nothing wrong, ma'am. Not yet, Elena thought. But she wanted to. God help her, she wanted to. That evening, Luke didn't come to dinner. Martha reported that he'd eaten with the hands again, claimed he was too tired for company. Elena picked at her food alone in the dining room, feeling the house's emptiness press down on her. She was being a fool. Risking everything, her reputation, her standing her control of the ranch for what? A few conversations. A kiss. The attention of a man who'd be gone as soon as the bridge was repaired. But it was more than that, and she knew it. It was the way Luke looked at her like she was a person, not a possession. The way he listened when she spoke. The way his presence made her remember that she was alive. After dinner, she found herself wandering to the library again. The broken glass had been cleaned up, but she could still picture Luke standing there, could still feel his hands in her hair. Thought I might find you here. She turned. Luke stood in the doorway, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. I've been avoiding you, he said bluntly. Thought it would be easier. But it's not. It's just making everything worse. Luke, let me finish. He moved into the room. I've been thinking about what you said about men making decisions for you, and you were right. I was doing exactly what I criticized your husband for, treating you like you don't know your own mind. Elena's throat tightened. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want me, then I'm not going to be noble about it anymore. I'm not going to pretend I don't want you back just because it's complicated or improper or because the town will crucify us both. He stopped in front of her. But I need you to be sure. Really sure. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. Elena's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. I'm sure. Say it. His voice was rough. Say what you want. I want you. The words came out steady and clear. I want this, whatever this is. I want to stop pretending I'm fine being alone. I want to stop being afraid of what people think. She took a breath. I want to feel alive again. Luke's eyes darkened. He reached for her slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his hands. I can't promise you forever, he said. I can't promise you stability or respectability or any of the things you deserve. But I can promise you this: for as long as you want me here, I'll see you, really see you, and I'll never treat you like anything less than an equal. That's all I've ever wanted, Elena whispered. This kiss was different from the first. Not desperate or rushed, but deliberate. A choice made with open eyes. Luke's mouth was gentle at first, then deeper, as Elena pressed against him. Her hands found their way under his shirt, feeling the heat of his skin, the hard muscle earned from years of physical labor. Elena. He breathed her name against her throat. Tell me to stop if this is too fast. Don't stop. Please don't stop. He lifted her, then carrying her to the leather sofa that had been Thomas's favorite. But Elena wasn't thinking about Thomas anymore. Wasn't thinking about anything except the way Luke's hands traced her spine, the way his mouth found the hollow of her throat, the way he whispered her name like it was something sacred. Clothes fell away slowly. Luke took his time as if memorizing every inch of her. When his hands found the laces of her corset, he paused. I've never... He stopped, color rising in his cheeks. Elena understood. Neither have I. Not like this. Not wanting it. That confession seemed to undo something in him. He kissed her with a hunger that matched her own, and Elena let herself fall into it, let herself feel wanted, desired, seen. When he finally entered her, she cried out, not from pain, but from the overwhelming sensation of being whole for the first time in her life. They moved together in the firelight, finding a rhythm as old as time. Luke's hands were everywhere in her hair, on her hips, tracing the curve of her breast. And Elena touched him back, learning the planes of his body, the places that made him gasp the way his eyes darkened when she whispered his name. When release came, it crashed over them both like a wave. Elena clung to Luke's shoulders, feeling tears streak down her cheeks. Tears of joy, of relief, of finally being free. After they lay tangled together on the sofa, skin cooling in the night air, Luke pulled a throw blanket over them, and Elena curled against his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. No regrets? He asked quietly. None. She traced patterns on his skin. Are you joking, Elena? That was... He stopped searching for words. That was everything. She smiled against his chest. Outside, crickets sang their evening chorus. The house creaked and settled, and for the first time since Thomas's death, maybe for the first time in her life, Elena felt at peace. But peace in Redemption Creek was never meant to last. The next morning, Elena woke alone. For a moment, panic seized her had Luke left. Had he regretted everything? Then she found the note on the pillow beside her. Didn't want to compromise you further by being found in your bed. I'm in the north pasture. Come find me when you're ready. L. Elena pressed the note to her chest, smiling like a fool. She dressed quickly, braided her hair, and slipped out of the house before Martha could catch her. The morning was cool and clear, the grass still damp with dew. She found Luke exactly where he'd said he'd be mending fence posts. He looked up when he heard her approach, and his smile transformed his whole face. Mornington, he said. Morning. Elena dismounted, and Luke pulled her close for a kiss that made her toes curl. We're going to have to be careful, he said against her hair. If anyone finds out... I know. Elena pulled back to look at him. But, Luke, I'm not sorry. I won't pretend to be. Neither am I. He tucked a stray curl behind her ear. But that doesn't mean I want to make your life harder. Sarah Whitlock already suspects something. If she gets proof, then she gets proof. Elena's voice was fierce. I'm done living my life for other people's approval. But as the words left her mouth, she heard hoofbeats, multiple horses approaching fast. Luke tensed his hand, moving instinctively to the rifle hanging from his saddle. 5 riders crested the hill. Elena's stomach dropped when she recognized the lead horse, Calvin Hensley. He was a big man, 50 years old, with a florid face and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. The 4 men with him were ranch hands, his ranch hands, Elena realized with growing dread. They surrounded Elena and Luke in a semicircle. Calvin dismounted, his eyes moving between them with calculated assessment. Elena, he said, his voice deceptively pleasant. Working your fences yourself now. My, how the mighty have fallen. What do you want, Calvin? Just being neighborly. Heard you had some storm damage. Thought I'd ride over and offer assistance. His gaze cut to Luke. Though I see you've already found help. Who's this new hand? Luke Morrison, Luke said evenly. Temporary hire. Temporary? Calvin's lips curved. How very temporary, I wonder. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt her temper ignite. If you have something to say, Calvin, say it and leave. Always so direct, Elena. That was one of the things I liked about you. Before you threw me over for Thomas Thorne. The old bitterness showed through. Though I suppose you chose wisely. Thorne could offer more than I could. Money, property, status. Thomas is dead. Yes. And now you're alone trying to run this ranch by yourself. It's admirable, really. But he looked at Luke again. You should be careful who you let onto your property. You never know what a man's intentions might be. Luke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Elena stepped forward. Mr. Morrison is a good worker and an honorable man, more honorable than some I could name. Is that so? Calvin's eyes glittered. Sarah Whitlock stopped by my place yesterday evening, said some interesting things about you and this young man, about how familiar you seemed together. Elena's heart hammered, but she kept her voice steady. Sarah has an overactive imagination. Does she? Because from where I'm standing, things look pretty familiar right now. Calvin moved closer, lowering his voice so only Elena could hear. You're playing a dangerous game, Elena. The town's already whispering. Keep this up and they'll turn on you. They'll find a way to take this ranch from you, declare you unfit. Is that what you want? What I want, Elena said clearly, is for you to leave my property. Calvin's face darkened. You're making a mistake. When this boy leaves and he will leave, you'll be alone with nothing but a ruined reputation. But I'm a patient man, Elena. When you come crawling back begging for respectability, I might still be willing to help you. For a price. Get out. For a moment, Elena thought he might refuse. Then Calvin's gaze shifted to Luke, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. You, he said to Luke, you know what happens to drifters who get above their station, who forget their place. I know what happens to men who threaten women, Luke replied evenly. Usually they end up looking foolish. One of Calvin's men moved his hand toward his gun. Luke didn't flinch. Easy, Calvin said, but there was satisfaction in his voice. We're just having a conversation, but you should think about what I said, boy. Towns like Redemption Creek don't take kindly to outsiders who don't know their place. Accidents happen, especially to young men who wander into situations they don't understand. That's enough. Elena's voice cracked like a whip. Calvin, you've worn out your welcome. If I see you on my property again without an invitation, I'll have you charged with trespassing. Calvin's smile was cold. You can't fight the whole town, Elena. Eventually they'll break you, and when they do, remember I tried to help. He remounted, and his men followed suit. They rode away slowly, deliberately, leaving dust hanging in the air behind them. Elena stood trembling with rage and fear. Luke moved to her side, his hand on her shoulder. He's going to make trouble, Luke said quietly. Real trouble. I know. Elena's voice shook. But I meant what I said. I won't let them bully me. Elena, maybe I should leave. If my being here is putting you at risk. No. She turned to face him. If you leave now, they win. Calvin wins. Sarah wins. Everyone who thinks I should just shut up and remarry and be a good little widow wins. And I'm done letting other people win. Luke studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, but we need to be smart about this. No more meeting alone in open fields. No more riding out together where people can see. So we hide. We're strategic. He touched her cheek. There's a difference. Elena knew he was right, but the thought of sneaking around, of pretending Luke was just another hired hand, made her want to scream. She'd finally found something real, something that made her feel alive, and now she had to hide it like a shameful secret. But as they rode back to the house, keeping careful distance between their horses, Elena made herself a promise. She would be strategic, yes, would be careful, but she could not give this up. Not for Calvin's threats, not for Sarah's gossip, not for the whole damn town's opinion. She'd spent 10 years in a cage of propriety and expectation. She wouldn't go back, no matter what it cost her. The cost came sooner than Elena expected. 3 days after Calvin's visit, she rode into Redemption Creek for the first time since the storm. The town nestled in a valley where Cottonwood Creek met the railroad line, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up when the Kansas Pacific pushed through 10 years earlier. Elena had always found it charming in a rough frontier way, the general store with its false front, the whitewashed church, the saloon that pretended to be respectable by calling itself a hotel. But today, riding down Main Street with Martha beside her in the buckboard, Elena felt the weight of watching eyes. Mrs. Henderson turned away when Elena waved. The butcher's wife whispered something to her companion, and both women stared. Even Reverend Thompson, coming out of the post office, gave Elena a look she couldn't quite decipher before tipping his hat and hurrying away. "Don't let them rattle you, ma'am," Martha muttered. "They're just bored housewives looking for excitement." But Elena's hands tightened on the reins. She'd known there would be talk, had prepared herself for it, yet the reality of being the subject of the town's speculation made her skin crawl. She tied up outside the general store, squaring her shoulders before walking in. The bell above the door chimed cheerfully at odds with the sudden silence that fell over the interior. 4 women stood near the fabric counter, and Elena recognized them all. Sarah Whitlock, of course, flanked by Agnes Miller, Dorothy, Cooper, and Jane Hartley. The town's self-appointed moral guardians. "Elena," Sarah's voice was honey-sweet. "How lovely to see you in town. We were just discussing the church social next month." "Sarah?" "Ladies." Elena nodded to each of them, determined to maintain her composure. "You look well." Agnes observed her sharp eyes, cataloging every detail. "Country life must agree with you." "It does." "And then how is your ranch managing?" Dorothy asked. "We heard you had to hire additional help. A drifter, wasn't it?" There it was. Elena felt the trap closing, but refused to show fear. "Mr. Morrison is an experienced ranch hand. I was fortunate he was available." "Experienced, is he?" Jane's eyebrows lifted. "And young, I heard." 25, 26. "I didn't ask his age. I asked about his qualifications." "Of course," Sarah smiled like a cat with cream. "Though it must be comforting having a young, strong man around the house. For protection, naturally." The implication hung heavy in the air. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks, but forced her voice to remain steady. "Mr. Morrison stays in the bunkhouse with the other hands, as is proper." "Oh, we're sure he does." Agnes exchanged a meaningful glance with the others. "It's just that people talk, you know. A widow alone on that big ranch, a handsome young drifter. Well, one can't help but wonder." "Wonder what exactly?" Elena cut her off, her temper finally breaking through. "Please, Agnes, do share what you're implying." Agnes had the grace to look uncomfortable, but Sarah stepped forward, all false concern. "No one's implying anything, dear. We're simply worried about your reputation. You know how vicious gossip can be. Why, just yesterday, Calvin Hensley mentioned he'd ridden out to check on you and found you alone in the north pasture with this Morrison fellow. No chaperone, no other hands in sight. You can understand why people might draw conclusions." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "Calvin had no business on my property, and he certainly has no business discussing what he saw there. As for conclusions, perhaps people should concern themselves with their own lives instead of manufacturing scandal where none exists." "Scandal?" Sarah's eyes widened in mock innocence. "Who said anything about scandal? We're simply concerned for you, Elena. You're vulnerable right now. A young widow, inexperienced with ranch management. It would be so easy for an unscrupulous man to take advantage of your situation. Thank you for your concern." Elena's voice could have frozen water. "But I'm perfectly capable of managing my own affairs." "Are you?" Dorothy spoke up. "Because frankly, Elena, we're all wondering if grief hasn't affected your judgment. Thomas has been dead less than a year, and already you're—" "Careful, Dorothy." Elena's voice was deadly quiet. "Be very careful what you say next." The 4 women exchanged glances. Then Sarah leaned in, dropping her voice to a conspiratorial whisper loud enough for the entire store to hear. "We're only thinking of what's best for you. And the truth is, dear people are talking about you and that drifter, about late nights and closed doors, about a widow who's forgotten her mourning to chase after a man young enough to be well, young enough that it looks quite desperate." Something inside Elena snapped. She'd endured 10 years of Thomas's condescension, 6 months of the town's pity, and now she was supposed to stand here and accept their judgment, accept their small-minded gossip and thinly veiled accusations. "Let me be perfectly clear," Elena said, her voice ringing through the store. "My personal life is none of your concern. Not yours, Sarah, not Calvin's, not this entire town's. I will run my ranch as I see fit, employ whom I choose, and live my life according to my own conscience, not your narrow definition of propriety." Agnes gasped. Dorothy's face flushed crimson. Even Sarah looked taken aback. "Well," Sarah recovered first, her smile turning vicious. I suppose that confirms it. The rumors are true. You and that boy. Get out of my way! Elena pushed past them, her purchases forgotten. She had to get out, had to escape before she said something truly unforgivable. Behind her, she heard the women's voices rise in a chorus of scandalized whispers. Outside, Martha was already in the buckboard looking worried. Ma'am, are you all right? We're leaving. Elena's hands shook as she untied the horses. Now! They drove out of town at a pace just short of reckless. Elena's chest felt tight, her eyes burning with unshed tears. She'd known it would be difficult, had prepared herself for gossip, but the reality of standing in that store facing their judgment and condemnation had been worse than anything she'd imagined. They're just jealous old hens, Martha said firmly. Pay them no mind. They're going to destroy me, Elena's voice cracked. They're going to find a way to take everything. The ranch, my reputation, my freedom. And for what? For daring to feel something. For refusing to spend the rest of my life in black silk, pretending to mourn a man who never truly loved me. Then fight them. Martha's jaw was set. You're stronger than the lot of them combined. Don't you dare let them win. But how did you fight an entire town? How did you stand against the collective weight of their judgment, their whispered accusations, their determination to see you broken and repentant? When they reached the ranch, Elena found Luke working in the corral, training a young horse. He looked up when he heard the buckboard, and his expression shifted immediately from concentration to concern. What happened? Elena climbed down her legs unsteady. They know. The whole town knows. Or thinks they know. Sarah's spreading it everywhere, you and me late nights impropriety. It's... She pressed her hands to her face. It's even worse than I thought it would be. Luke's face darkened. He handed the horse's lead to one of the other hands and strode over. What did they say? Everything. That I'm desperate, that you're taking advantage, that I've forgotten my mourning, that... Her voice broke. That I look pathetic chasing after a man young enough to make me look foolish. Those vicious... Luke bit off the curse. Elena, you're not pathetic. You're not desperate. They're just small-minded people who can't stand to see someone refuse to live by their rules. But they have all the power. Elena looked up at him and she knew her eyes were red. Calvin was right. They'll find a way to take the ranch. They'll declare me unfit, say I'm not capable of managing it. And without the ranch, I have nothing. I'll have to leave, start over somewhere else, and even then the rumors will follow me. Luke's hands clenched into fists. Then we fight back. We show them there's nothing improper going on. By doing what, pretending we barely know each other, going back to acting like you're just another hired hand. Elena shook her head. I can't do that, Luke. I can't go back to pretending to hiding who I am and what I feel. I did that for 10 years with Thomas, and it nearly killed something vital inside me. So what do you want to do? The question hung between them. Elena looked around at the ranch, the land Thomas had built, the empire he'd created, the legacy he'd left her. And she realized with startling clarity that she didn't care. Didn't care about the empire or the legacy or even the ranch itself. What she cared about was the freedom to choose, the right to live her own life, the courage to stand up and say, this is who I am, and I won't apologize for it. I want to stop hiding, she said finally. I want to stand in front of that town and tell them the truth. That yes, I care about you, that yes, you care about me, that there's nothing shameful or desperate about two people finding connection in this harsh world. They'll crucify you. Then they crucify me. Elena's voice grew stronger. But I'll go down fighting. I'll go down as myself, not as some pale shadow wearing widow's weeds and pretending to be what everyone else thinks I should be. Luke studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, close enough that anyone watching could see, and took her hand. Then we do it together, he said. Whatever comes. We face it together. Elena squeezed his fingers, feeling something fierce and bright kindle in her chest. Together. But standing against the town's judgment was easier said than done. Over the next week, the pressure mounted. The feed store owner refused Elena's order, claiming he was out of stock, though she could see bags stacked in the corner. The bank manager sent a letter requesting an urgent meeting to discuss concerns about the ranch's management. Even Reverend Thompson rode out to the ranch, his expression grave. "Mrs. Thorne?" he began, and Elena bristled at the use of her married name. "I've come as a friend, as your spiritual advisor. There are rumors circulating in town that deeply concern me." They stood in the parlor proper and stiff. Elena hadn't offered tea. "I'm aware of the rumors, Reverend." "Then you understand why I'm here. Elena, may I call you Elena?" "Thank you. Elena, you're a young woman recently widowed. It's natural that you might feel lonely, might seek companionship, but you must understand how your actions appear to others." "My actions?" Elena's voice was ice. "You mean employing a ranch hand. I mean entertaining a young man unchaperoned in your home, late at night. The two of you riding out alone together. Elena, surely you see how this looks." "It looks like I'm running my ranch." Reverend Thompson sighed. "You're making this very difficult. The church elders have discussed the situation. We're concerned about your moral welfare, about the example you're setting for other young women in the community." "The example I'm setting," Elena's temper flared. "What about the example set by men like Calvin Hensley, who think they can bully and threaten women into submission? Or women like Sarah Whitlock, who spread vicious gossip to tear down anyone who refuses to conform? Where's your concern for their moral welfare? That's not fair, isn't it? For 10 years, I was the perfect wife, perfect church member. I attended every service, every social, smiled and nodded, and never caused trouble. And where was the church when Thomas treated me like a beautiful piece of property? Where was your concern then?" The Reverend's face flushed. "Your marriage was between you and your husband, but your current behavior affects the entire community. If you continue down this path, I'll have no choice but to ask you to step down from your position on the Ladies' Auxiliary, and the elders may decide that you're no longer welcome at services until you've repented and made amends." Elena felt as if she'd been slapped, excommunicated, cast out. For what? For refusing to be lonely, for daring to feel something real. "Then I suppose," she said quietly, "that I'll have to find God somewhere other than your church." Reverend Thompson's expression hardened. "I hope you'll reconsider. For your own sake, Elena. The path you're on leads only to ruin." After he left, Elena stood alone in the parlor, shaking. She'd just burned another bridge. Another door slammed in her face. How many more before she found herself completely isolated? Martha found her there an hour later, staring out the window at the prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon. "You did the right thing," Martha said firmly. "Did I? Because it doesn't feel right. It feels like I'm losing everything." "You're not losing what matters." Martha crossed to stand beside her. "You're losing the approval of people who never truly cared about you, who only valued you as long as you played by their rules. That's not loss, ma'am. That's liberation." Elena wanted to believe her, wanted to feel liberated instead of terrified, but the walls were closing in and she couldn't see a way out. That night, Luke found her in the barn. She was grooming her mare, taking comfort in the simple, repetitive motion. He leaned against the stall door, just watching her for a moment. "You don't have to say it," Elena said without looking up. "I know what you're thinking, that this is too hard, that I should give up, send you away, make peace with the town." "That's not what I was thinking." Luke's voice was quiet. "I was thinking you're the bravest person I've ever met." Elena's hand stilled on the brush. "I don't feel brave. I feel terrified." "Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's being terrified and doing the right thing anyway." He entered the stall, taking the brush from her hands. "Elena, look at me." She did. In the lamplight, his eyes were storm-dark and serious. "I know what I am," he said. "A drifter with nothing to offer except these two hands and whatever strength I have. You're risking everything for me, your home, your reputation, your place in this community, and part of me says I should walk away, should leave tonight and never look back, let you rebuild your life without me complicating things." Elena's chest constricted. "Is that what you want?" "God, no." The words came out fierce. "What I want is to stay, to fight beside you, to build something real together, regardless of what the town thinks. But I need to know that's what you want too. Because if we do this, if we really stand together and defy them, there's no going back. You'll be the scandal of Redemption Creek, the widow who took up with a drifter half her age. I'm only 7 years older than you. You know that's not how they'll tell it. Luke touched her face. They'll make you the villain of their story, the desperate widow, the fallen woman. Can you live with that? Elena thought about it, really thought about what it would mean. Being cut off from the church, from society, from everything she'd known. Living on the edges, subject to whispers and judgment. Watching the town turn its back on her one person at a time. And then she thought about the alternative, sending Luke away. Going back to the empty house, the lonely nights, the suffocating weight of living for other people's approval. Marrying Calvin Hensley, or someone like him trading one cage for another just to reclaim respectability she'd never truly wanted in the first place. Yes, she said finally. I can live with it, because the alternative is not living at all. It's just existing, going through motions. And I'm done with that. Luke's expression softened. He pulled her close, and Elena buried her face against his chest, breathing in the scent of hay and leather and him. Then we do this right, he murmured against her hair. No more hiding, no more pretending. If they want to see scandal, we'll give them honesty instead. What do you mean? Luke pulled back his eyes, bright with something like determination. I mean, we stop acting like we have something to be ashamed of. I mean, I move out of the bunkhouse and into the main house proper and open. I mean, we tell anyone who asks that yes, we care about each other, and no, we don't apologize for it. Luke, that's crazy. Probably, but hiding hasn't worked. Trying to maintain propriety hasn't worked. Maybe the only way forward is through, straight through, no apologies, no shame. Elena's heart hammered. It was radical, scandalous, everything the town would condemn. But it was also honest, real. A declaration that she refused to be controlled by their judgment. All right, she said, let's do it. The next morning, Luke moved his few belongings into one of the guest rooms in the main house. The ranch hands watched with varying expressions, some surprised, some knowing all careful to keep their opinions to themselves. Only Jake, the oldest hand who'd worked for Thomas since the beginning, dared to speak. "Ma'am, is this wise?" he asked quietly. "People are going to talk." "People are already talking, Jake." Elena met his gaze steadily. At least now they'll have facts instead of speculation. Jake shook his head but said nothing more. That afternoon, Elena and Luke rode into town together, side by side, making no effort to hide or maintain distance. They tied their horses outside the general store, and Elena felt every eye on Main Street turn their way. Inside the store, conversations died mid-sentence. Mrs. Henderson clutched her basket like a shield. The storekeeper, Mr. Jameson, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Morrison, how can I help you today?" "I need supplies," Elena said clearly. "Flour, sugar, coffee. And Mr. Morrison needs new work gloves. His wore through mending my fences." The emphasis on "my fences" was deliberate, a reminder that Luke worked for her, that he'd earned his place on her ranch. Mr. Jameson nodded slowly, gathering the items. While he worked, Sarah Whitlock swept in Agnes Miller trailing behind her. Both women stopped short when they saw Elena and Luke standing together at the counter. "Well," Sarah said, her voice carrying, "I see the rumors were true after all." Elena turned to face her. "If you have something to say to me, Sarah, say it directly instead of whispering behind my back." Sarah's eyes glittered. "Very well. The whole town is talking about you and this boy, about how you've installed him in your home like some kind of—" She paused delicately. "Kept man." Gasps rippled through the store. Elena felt Luke tense beside her, but touched his arm lightly, a silent request to let her handle this. "Mr. Morrison is my employee and my friend," Elena said clearly. "And what happens in my home is my business." "Your friend?" Agnes's voice climbed. "A widow and a man young enough to be—" "To be what?" Elena cut her off. "To be unsuitable. According to whose standards? Yours, because I don't recall asking for your approval." "You don't need to ask," Sarah snapped. "Decent people don't need to be told what's proper. They just know. But apparently you've forgotten. I haven't forgotten anything. Elena's voice was steel. I've simply stopped caring what you think, what any of you think. I spent 10 years living for other people's approval, and where did it get me? A loveless marriage, an empty life. Well, no more. I'm done apologizing for wanting something real. The store had gone completely silent. Even Mr. Jameson had stopped working, staring at Elena with wide eyes. Sarah drew herself up, her face flushed with anger. You're a disgrace, a scandal. And mark my words, Elena Thorne, you'll pay for this. The church will excommunicate you. Society will shun you. And when this boy leaves you, and he will leave you, you'll find yourself with nothing, no reputation, no friends, nothing. Then I'll have nothing, Elena said quietly. But at least I'll have myself, and that's more than I had before. She took Luke's arm deliberately publicly and walked out of the store with her head high. Behind them, the whispers erupted like a dam breaking. They rode home in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who'd just crossed a point of no return and were still processing what it meant. When they reached the ranch, Luke helped Elena dismount, his hands lingering on her waist. That was... He searched for words. That was something. That was suicide, Elena said, but she was smiling. Social suicide, anyway. Any regrets? She thought about it. About the shocked faces in the store, Sarah's fury, the whispers that would be flying through town even now, about everything she'd just thrown away with a few defiant words. No, she said finally. No regrets. But that night, lying in bed, Elena couldn't sleep. The enormity of what she'd done pressed down on her chest. She'd burned every bridge, severed every connection. The town would close ranks against her now, would make her life as difficult as possible. And for what? For a connection that might not last. For a man who might wake up tomorrow and realize he'd made a terrible mistake. A soft knock on her door made her sit up. Come in. Luke entered still dressed, his expression uncertain. I saw your light. Couldn't sleep either. Too much thinking. Want company? Just talking, he added quickly. I'm not presuming. Luke, you live in this house now. You don't have to ask permission to talk to me. Elena patted the bed beside her. Sit. He settled on top of the covers, maintaining a careful distance. They sat in silence for a moment, and Elena found herself studying his profile in the moonlight streaming through the window. What are you thinking? She asked finally. That I've ruined your life. That if I just kept riding that day instead of stopping here, you'd still have everything. Your reputation, your place in society, your future. I didn't have any of those things. Elena's voice was firm. I had the illusion of them, but it was all hollow, Luke, meaningless, like living in a beautiful house with no foundation. Eventually it was going to collapse anyway. But now I'm free. She reached for his hand. For the first time in my life, I'm truly free. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, I don't know what comes next, but I'd rather face uncertainty on my own terms than spend another day living someone else's definition of a proper life. Luke turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. You're extraordinary. You know that I'm stubborn. That too. He smiled, but it faded quickly. Elena, I need you to know something. I'm not leaving, no matter what happens. No matter how hard they make it, I'm staying. You're not facing this alone. The words settled something deep in Elena's chest. She squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered. They talked until dawn broke over the prairie, sharing fears and hopes, and the strange, exhilarating terror of having chosen honesty over safety. And when Luke finally left to start the day's work, Elena felt stronger than she had in years. Whatever came next, she would face it, and she wouldn't face it alone. The retaliation came swiftly and viciously. 2 days after Elena's confrontation in the general store, she woke to find 3 of her ranch hands gone. Not sick, not injured, just gone. Their bunks in the bunkhouse stripped bare, their wages taken from the lockbox where she kept payroll. Jake found the note pinned to the barn door. Can't work for a woman who's forgotten decency. Find yourself more help elsewhere. Elena crumpled the paper in her fist fury, making her hands shake. Luke read over her shoulder, his jaw tight. They got to them, he said. Calvin, or someone like him, probably offered them jobs elsewhere better pay as long as they abandoned you. 3 hands. Elena's voice was hollow. That leaves us with Jake, Tommy, and Miguel. 4 men to run 3,000 acres. It's not enough. Then we make it enough. Luke's voice was firm. We work harder, longer days. I'll do the work of 3 men if I have to. But it wasn't just the lost hands. The following week, the feed store owner, Mr. Patterson, who'd been selling to Thorn Ranch for 15 years, sent word that he could no longer extend credit. Payment in full cash only or no sale. When Elena rode to the bank to withdraw funds, she found the manager, Mr. Whitmore, waiting with a grim expression. Mrs. Thorne, we need to discuss your accounts. They sat in his office while he shuffled papers, not quite meeting her eyes. Elena's stomach knotted. There have been concerns raised by several prominent citizens about your management of the ranch, about your judgment. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. The bank has decided it would be prudent to call in your outstanding loans. Elena's blood turned to ice. Call in the loans, Mr. Whitmore. Those loans aren't due for another 3 years. Thomas structured them specifically. Mr. Thorne is deceased, and given recent events, the bank feels it's necessary to reassess our position. He finally looked at her, and Elena saw something like pity in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thorne, but you have 60 days to pay in full. Otherwise, we'll be forced to foreclose. The room tilted. 60 days? That's impossible. The loan is for $20,000. I don't have that kind of cash, no rancher does. Everything's tied up in cattle and land, and then perhaps it's time to consider selling. I know Calvin Hensley has expressed interest in purchasing your property. I'm sure he'd offer a fair price. And there it was, the real reason behind the sudden demand. Calvin working behind the scenes using his influence with the bank to force her hand. Sell to him or lose everything. No. Elena stood her legs unsteady. I'm not selling. Not to Calvin, not to anyone. Mrs. Thorne, please be reasonable. Reasonable. Elena's voice climbed. You're trying to steal my ranch because I won't conform to your idea of proper behavior, and you want me to be reasonable. This isn't personal. Everything about this is personal. She leaned across his desk. Tell Calvin that if he wants my ranch, he'll have to pry it from my dead hands, because I will not be bullied into submission. She stormed out, ignoring Mr. Whitmore's protests. Outside, the autumn sun beat down mercilessly, and Elena felt dizzy with rage and fear. 60 days. How could she possibly raise $20,000 in 60 days? Luke was waiting by the horses, his expression darkening when he saw her face. What happened? They called in the loans. Elena's voice was flat with shock. I have 60 days to pay $20,000 or lose the ranch. Luke's curse was vicious and heartfelt. Calvin. Of course it's Calvin. He's behind all of it, the hands leaving the credit being cut off, now this. He's going to squeeze until I have no choice but to sell to him. Elena pressed her hands to her face. And the worst part is it's working. I can't raise that kind of money, not in 60 days. Then we find a way. Luke's voice was steel. We sell cattle early, take a loss if we have to, borrow from other banks in other towns. Who's going to lend to me now? The whole territory probably knows about the scandal. I'm a pariah, Luke. A cautionary tale about widows who forget their place. She hadn't meant to sound so defeated, but the weight of it all was crushing. Luke pulled her close right there on Main Street where anyone could see, and Elena was too tired to care about propriety. We'll figure it out, he murmured against her hair. I promise you, Elena, we'll find a way. But finding a way proved harder than either of them anticipated. Over the next week, Elena sent inquiries to banks in Dodge City, Wichita, even as far as Kansas City. All came back with polite refusals. No one wanted to lend to a woman whose judgment was questionable, whose scandal had spread like wildfire across the plains. Meanwhile, the ranch work piled up. With only 4 hands, including Luke, they were stretched impossibly thin. Fences went unmended. Cattle wandered. The garden that Martha tended so carefully began to wither from neglect because there was no one to haul water. Elena worked alongside the men from dawn until dusk, learning to rope and brand and do all the things Thomas had never wanted her to know about. Her hands blistered and bled. Her back ached constantly. But she refused to give up. One evening, 3 weeks after the bank's ultimatum, Elena sat at Thomas's desk reviewing the accounts. The numbers didn't lie. Even if she sold every head of cattle, every horse, everything that wasn't nailed down, she'd still be $5,000 short. $5,000 she simply didn't have. A knock on the study door made her look up. Jake stood there, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you." Elena's heart sank. "You're leaving too." "No, ma'am." Jake stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I'm not leaving, but I need to be honest with you about something. The other hand's the ones who left. They didn't just up and quit on their own. Calvin Hensley came by the bunkhouse one night, offered them double wages to leave. Told them you were going to lose the ranch anyway, that they'd be smart to jump ship before it sank." Elena closed her eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's not right." Jake's voice was gruff. "I worked for Mr. Thorne for 15 years. Respected him even if I didn't always agree with how he did things. But you, ma'am, you're fighting for this place like it actually means something beyond just money and pride. And that young man Morrison, he works harder than any 3 hands I've seen. Does the job without complaining treats everyone with respect?" Jake shifted his weight. "What I'm saying is I don't care what the town thinks. You've got a right to live your life however you see fit, and if you're fighting to keep this ranch, then I'm fighting with you." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on all the people turning against her that she'd forgotten there might still be some who'd stand beside her. "Thank you, Jake." Her voice was thick. "That means more than you know." "There's something else." Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather pouch. "I've been saving for 20 years. Got about $800 put away. It's yours if you need it." Elena stared at the pouch, her throat closing. "Jake, I can't take your savings." "Yes, you can, because if you lose this ranch, I'm out of a job anyway. Might as well invest in keeping the place running." He set the pouch on the desk. "Tommy and Miguel, they said the same thing. Between the 3 of us, we can probably scrape together about $1,500. It's not much, but it's everything." Elena stood, tears streaming down her face. "Jake, I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep fighting." He nodded once and left, closing the door softly behind him. Elena sat back down, staring at the leather pouch. $1,500 from men who had no reason to trust her, who risked their own futures by supporting hers. It still wasn't enough. She was still $3,500 short, but it was something. It was hope. Luke found her there an hour later, the accounting book spread before her, tears dried on her cheeks. "I heard what Jake did," he said quietly. "The other hands too. It's not enough. Even with their help, I'm still thousands short." Elena looked up at him. "Luke, I think I need to face reality. I'm going to lose the ranch." "No." Luke crossed the room, kneeling beside her chair. "You're not losing anything. Not if I have anything to say about it. What can you do? You said yourself you've only got $60 to your name." "I've got more than that." Luke's jaw was set. "I've got 2 hands, a strong back, and 60 days. I'll hire myself out to every ranch between here and Dodge City. Work day and night if I have to. Whatever I make goes to saving this place." "Luke, that's insane. You can't possibly earn enough." "Watch me." He took her hands. "Elena, you gave me something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. Purpose. A reason to stay in one place and fight for something that matters. Let me do this. Let me help. I can't ask you to sacrifice." "You're not asking. I'm offering." His eyes were fierce. "We're in this together. Remember, that's what we said. So let me be your partner, not just your hired hand. Let me fight for our future." Our future. The words hung between them, weighted with promise and possibility. Elena squeezed his hands, feeling something shift in her chest. "All right," she whispered. "Together." The next morning, Luke rode out before dawn. He'd made arrangements with 3 neighboring ranches not close enough to Redemption Creek to be influenced by the scandal to do odd jobs, breaking horses, mending fences, whatever they needed. He'd work from dawn until dusk, then ride home to help Elena with the evening chores before collapsing into exhausted sleep. Elena watched him go with her heart in her throat. Then she turned to her own battle. If Luke was going to work himself to death earning money, she'd do everything possible to cut costs and stretch what they had. She sat down with Martha and Jake to review every expense. We'll slaughter our own beef instead of buying from the butcher, Elena decided. And Martha, I know it's more work, but can we plant a larger garden next spring? Grow our own vegetables instead of buying them. We can do better than that, Martha said. My sister in Wichita, she makes preserves and sells them. I could do the same. Bring in a little extra income. I can hunt, Jake offered. Get us deer and rabbit. Save the cattle for selling. Every little bit helped. Elena sold off the fancy china. Thomas had been so proud of the crystal decanters, the imported rugs. Anything that wasn't essential to survival went to auction in Dodge City, where people didn't know or care about her scandal. It brought in another $800. But even with everyone's efforts, the deadline loomed like an executioner's blade. 40 days left. 30. 20. Luke came home each night more exhausted than the last. Elena watched him grow leaner, saw new lines form around his eyes. One evening, he nearly fell out of the saddle, and Elena had to help him inside. You're killing yourself, she said, helping him to a chair. I'm fine. But his hand shook as he reached for the water she offered. You're not fine. Luke, you've lost weight. You barely sleep. This is too much. It's not too much if it saves the ranch. He looked up at her with bloodshot eyes. I've earned almost $2,000 in the last month. Add that to what Jake and the others contributed, plus what you made selling things. We're getting close, Elena. We're actually close. She'd done the math. Even with everything, they were still $1,000 short. $1,000 that might as well be $1 million for all the possibility of obtaining it. Maybe it's time to consider alternatives, Elena said quietly. I could sell some of the land, keep the house, and a small parcel, sell the rest to Calvin. Luke's voice was sharp. That's what he wants. To break you piece by piece until there's nothing left. Better to sell on my terms than have it taken by the bank. No. Luke stood swaying slightly. We still have time, 10 days. I can work double shifts, take on more. You can't. Elena's voice broke. Luke, look at yourself. You're barely standing. I won't watch you destroy yourself trying to save something that might already be lost. It's not lost. His voice was fierce despite his exhaustion. Not while we're still fighting. But the next day brought news that nearly shattered what remained of Elena's hope. She was in the barn when she heard horses approaching, multiple riders moving fast. She stepped outside to find Sheriff Morrison, no relation to Luke, thankfully leading a group of 5 men. Mrs. Thorne? The sheriff tipped his hat, but his expression was grim. I need you to come with me. What's this about? Calvin Hensley has filed a complaint. Says you've been harassing him, making threats. He's requesting a restraining order, and... The sheriff paused. And he's petitioned the court to have you declared mentally unfit to manage your affairs. The words hit like a physical blow. Elena actually staggered back a step. Mentally unfit. That's insane. He's got testimonies from several town members. The Reverend the bank manager, several ladies from the church. They all say you've been behaving erratically since your husband's death, making poor decisions, engaging in improper relationships. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I have to bring you in for a hearing. A hearing? Elena's voice climbed. When? Tomorrow morning. Judge Blackwood will preside. The sheriff shifted his weight. Ma'am, I know this is hard, but it'll go easier if you come willingly. Elena's mind raced. A competency hearing. If the judge ruled against her, he could appoint a conservator to manage her affairs, almost certainly Calvin. She'd lose control of the ranch, lose everything without even the dignity of fighting back. I'll come. Her voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. But I'm bringing a lawyer. That's your right, ma'am. But finding a lawyer proved impossible. Every attorney in Redemption Creek refused her case. Either they were friends with Calvin, or they didn't want to be associated with the scandal. Even lawyers in Dodge City declined once they heard her name. By evening, Elena was frantic. Luke had ridden in early, alerted by Jake, and found her in the study surrounded by rejection telegrams. No one will take the case, she said flatly. Tomorrow morning, I go before Judge Blackwood alone, and he'll declare me unfit, and everything we've fought for will be gone. Luke's face was pale. Then we leave. Tonight. We pack what we can carry and ride out. Start over somewhere else. Run away. Elena looked at him. Is that what you want, to spend our lives looking over our shoulders, always wondering when the past will catch up? I want you safe, free, even if it means giving up the ranch. The words were meant to comfort, but they ignited something fierce in Elena's chest. She stood, her hands clenched into fists. No. No more running, no more hiding, no more letting bullies like Calvin Hensley dictate my life. Her voice grew stronger. If I'm going before that judge tomorrow, I'm going with my head high, and I'm going to tell the truth, all of it, about my marriage, about my choices, about my right to live my life on my own terms. Elena, if I do that, I might lose anyway, but at least I'll lose honestly. At least I'll lose as myself. She met his gaze. You taught me that. You taught me that being true to yourself matters more than safety or approval or any of it. Luke crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. Then we do it together. I'm coming with you tomorrow, and if they want to declare you unfit, they'll have to go through me first. They held each other in the dimness of the study while the sun set outside. Elena felt the steady beat of Luke's heart against her cheek and drew strength from it. Whatever happened tomorrow, she wouldn't face it alone. That night, Elena barely slept. She lay awake reviewing everything she wanted to say, every argument she could make. But in the pre-dawn darkness, doubt crept in. What if she wasn't strong enough? What if her words failed her? What if the judge had already decided, influenced by Calvin's money and the town's prejudice? Luke found her standing at the window watching the sun rise, wrapped in a shawl against the morning chill. Second thoughts? He asked quietly. Constant thoughts. She turned to look at him. Luke, if this goes badly, if I lose, I want you to know that I don't regret any of it. Not the defiance, not the scandal, not standing with you. Whatever happens today, these past weeks have been the first time I've felt truly alive. Don't talk like it's over. Luke took her hands. We haven't lost yet. But if we do, then we'll figure out what comes next, together. He squeezed her fingers. Elena, I need to tell you something. I've been holding back, trying to be cautious, but if today is our last chance... He took a breath. I love you. I'm in love with you. Not with the ranch or the money or any of it. Just you. The woman who stood in a general store and refused to apologize for choosing her own happiness. The woman who works from dawn to dusk trying to save something that matters. The woman who's braver than anyone I've ever met. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. God help me, I do. They kissed in the golden light of dawn, soft and desperate and full of promise. Then they dressed for battle, Elena in her finest black dress, Luke in the suit he'd borrowed from Jake. They rode into town side by side, and if anyone found it improper, Elena no longer cared. The courthouse was packed. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the spectacle. Elena saw Sarah Whitlock in the front row, her expression gleeful. Calvin Hensley sat behind the plaintiff's table, looking smug and satisfied. Even Reverend Thompson was there, his face grave. Judge Blackwood was a man of 60, stern-faced and intimidating behind his elevated bench. He called the court to order, and Calvin's lawyer, a slick man from Wichita named Sterling, stood to present his case. Your Honor, we're here today to address a matter of grave concern. Mrs. Elena Thorne, widow of the late Thomas Thorne, has demonstrated repeatedly that she is not mentally or emotionally capable of managing the substantial estate left to her. We have numerous witnesses who will testify to her erratic behavior, poor judgment, and moral decline in the months since her husband's death. He called witness after witness. Sarah Whitlock testified about Elena's inappropriate relationship with a man half her age. The bank manager spoke about Elena's reckless financial decisions. Reverend Thompson reluctantly described her defiance of moral authority. Each testimony added another stone to the wall being built around her. Elena sat through it all, her back straight, refusing to show fear. Luke sat beside her. The judge had allowed it over Sterling's objections, his presence a steady anchor. Finally, Sterling turned to Elena. Mrs. Thorne, is it true that you have engaged in an improper relationship with your employee? Mr. Luke Morrison. Elena stood. Her voice rang clear through the courtroom. If by improper you mean we care for each other, then yes. If you mean we've treated each other with respect and honesty, then yes. If you mean we've chosen connection over loneliness, then yes, that's also true. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Sterling's eyes gleamed. So you admit to moral impropriety. I admit to being human, to wanting companionship, to refusing to spend the rest of my life in mourning for a marriage that was more prison than partnership. Elena's voice grew stronger. You want to know about my judgment? Here's what I judge. I judge that a system that tells widows they must remain alone or be declared unfit is cruel. I judge that men like Calvin Hensley who try to steal a woman's property because she won't submit to his control are the real danger. I judge that every person in this courtroom who claims to care about my well-being while trying to strip away my autonomy is a hypocrite. Mrs. Thorne, Judge Blackwood warned, but Elena wasn't finished. Your Honor, I understand what this hearing is really about. It's not about my mental fitness, it's about control. About punishing a woman who dared to step outside the boundaries society set for her, about ensuring that widows remain grateful and submissive and properly sorrowful. She turned to face the packed courtroom. But I won't be those things. I won't apologize for wanting more from life than empty propriety. And if that makes me unfit, then your definition of fitness is meaningless. The courtroom erupted. Judge Blackwood banged his gavel, calling for order. Sterling was on his feet objecting, but Elena's words had hit their mark. She could see it in the faces around her, some still disapproving, but others thoughtful, even conflicted. Mrs. Thorne, Judge Blackwood's voice was stern. This court is not a forum for your personal grievances. The question before me is simple. Are you capable of managing your estate responsibly? I am. Elena met his gaze steadily. I've kept the ranch running despite losing half my workforce. I've managed the accounts, negotiated deals, learned skills I was never taught because my husband believed women shouldn't concern themselves with business. I've made mistakes, yes, but no more than any other rancher facing the same challenges. The only difference is that I'm a woman, and I've refused to remarry or sell to a man who thinks he knows better than I do what's best for me. Judge Blackwood studied her for a long moment. Mr. Morrison, please stand. Luke rose, his expression wary. Young man, what is your intention toward Mrs. Thorne? Luke's voice was clear and firm. To stand beside her, to support her, to help her build the life she deserves. And you expect nothing in return. No claim on her property. I expect to be treated as her equal, her partner, not her master or her manager or anything else that suggests I own her. Luke's eyes were fierce. She's the strongest person I know, Your Honor. She doesn't need me to save her. She needs people to stop trying to control her. The judge's expression was unreadable. He looked at Elena, at Luke, then out at the packed courtroom. The silence stretched endlessly. This court will recess for 1 hour while I consider my ruling, he said finally. The wait was agony. Elena and Luke sat on a bench outside the courtroom while the town milled around whispering and speculating. Martha had come along with Jake and the other hands, and they formed a protective circle around Elena and Luke. Whatever happens, Martha said firmly, you did the right thing. But right didn't always win. Elena knew that. Justice didn't always prevail. Sometimes the bullies won simply because they had more power, more influence, more willingness to use the system against those who challenged it. When they were called back and Elena's hands were shaking, she gripped Luke's fingers as they stood to hear the judge's ruling. Judge Blackwood looked out over the courtroom, his expression grave. I've heard compelling arguments from both sides today. Mr. Sterling has presented evidence of behavior some might consider improper or ill-advised. Mrs. Thorne has presented a passionate defense of her right to self-determination. He paused, letting the tension build. However, the question before this court is not whether Mrs. Thorne's choices align with society's expectations. The question is whether she is mentally and emotionally competent to manage her own affairs. Elena held her breath. And based on the evidence presented, I find no credible proof of incompetence. Mrs. Thorne has managed her ranch successfully despite significant obstacles. She has paid her bills, maintained her property, and made business decisions that, while perhaps unconventional, show no signs of mental instability or inability to reason. Judge Blackwood's gaze swept the courtroom. What I do see is a community that seems more interested in punishing a woman for defying social conventions than in any genuine concern for her well-being. That is not sufficient grounds for removing someone's autonomy. Relief flooded through Elena so powerfully she nearly collapsed. Luke's arm around her waist was the only thing keeping her upright. "The petition is denied," Judge Blackwood concluded. "Mrs. Thorne retains full control of her property and affairs. This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Some people cheered, others shouted in outrage. Calvin Hensley's face turned purple with rage, and he lunged toward the judge's bench before his lawyer grabbed his arm. Sarah Whitlock stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. And Elena felt the world tilt and right itself all at once. "You did it." Luke breathed against her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "My God, Elena, you actually did it." But there was no time to celebrate. Sterling was already on his feet, objecting loudly. "Your Honor, I must protest this ruling. The evidence clearly shows. The evidence shows a woman making choices you disagree with." Judge Blackwood interrupted, his voice sharp. "That is not the same as incompetence, counselor. My ruling stands." Calvin shoved past his lawyer, his face contorted with fury. "You're making a mistake, Judge. That woman is unfit. She's a disgrace, a scandal." "Mr. Hensley." The judge's voice cracked like a whip. "One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. This hearing is over." Elena turned to leave, Luke's hand steady at her back, but Calvin's voice stopped her. "You think you've won?" His words were low, venomous, meant only for her ears. "You still have the bank loan. 10 days, Elena. 10 days and you lose everything anyway. The judge may have protected your reputation, but he can't save your ranch." The words hit like ice water. Elena had been so focused on the competency hearing that she'd almost forgotten the looming deadline. 10 days to raise $1,000 she didn't have. 10 days before the bank foreclosed and Calvin got the ranch anyway, just through different means. But she lifted her chin and met his gaze without flinching. "Then I'll fight that battle too, and I'll keep fighting until there's nothing left to fight with." Calvin's laugh was ugly. "That's exactly what's going to happen. You'll have nothing left." Outside the courthouse, Martha was waiting with the buckboard. Jake and the other hands formed a protective semicircle as Elena and Luke emerged. The crowd parted. Some people still muttering darkly, but others Elena saw with surprise were looking at her with something that might have been respect. "Mrs. Thorne," a woman's voice tentative. Elena turned to find Dorothy Cooper, one of Sarah's usual allies, standing a few feet away. Her face was flushed, uncertain. "I just wanted to say what you said in there about widows being told to remain alone or be declared unfit. That was—" She swallowed hard. "That was brave. And true." Before Elena could respond, Dorothy hurried away as if afraid of being seen talking to the town pariah. But the words settled something in Elena's chest. Maybe she hadn't won everyone over. Maybe most of the town would still whisper and judge. But she'd made some people think, had planted seeds of doubt about the cruelty of their conventions. That was something. The ride home was quiet. Elena felt wrung out, exhausted from the emotional toll of the hearing. But underneath the exhaustion was a fierce, burning determination. She'd won this battle. She wouldn't surrender the war. Back at the ranch, Martha had prepared a celebration dinner, roast chicken and potatoes apple pie, made from the last of the fall harvest. The hands gathered around the kitchen table, and for a little while they let themselves forget about deadlines and bank loans and hostile towns. "To Elena Ward," Jake said, raising his glass, "the most stubborn woman in Kansas." "I'll drink to that," Miguel agreed, grinning. They toasted and ate and told stories, and Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest. This was what mattered. Not the town's approval or Calvin's schemes, but this people gathered around a table choosing to stand together, choosing to believe that kindness and courage could matter more than convention. Later, after the hands had gone to the bunkhouse and Martha had retired, Elena and Luke sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the vast prairie sky. The night was cool autumn, giving way to the bite of approaching winter. 10 days, Elena said quietly. Calvin was right. Even with everything we've scraped together, we're still short. How much? $1,000. Might as well be $1 million. She leaned against Luke's shoulder. I've been thinking, maybe I should accept Calvin's offer. Sell him half the ranch, use that money to pay off the bank, keep the rest. You know he won't stop there. Luke's arm tightened around her. He'll use that foothold to squeeze you out completely. Within a year, he'll have it all. Then what choice do I have? Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, pulling Elena to her feet. Come with me. There's something I need to show you. He led her to the barn, to the stall where his horse was kept. From his saddlebag, he pulled out a small leather pouch Elena had seen before, the one that held his life savings. But now it felt heavier. I told you I had $60, Luke said quietly. That was a lie. Well, not exactly a lie. I had $60 in cash, but I also had this. He opened the pouch and poured something into Elena's palm. A pocket watch, gold and ornate, with initials engraved on the back, JRM. My father's, Luke explained. His father gave it to him, and he gave it to me before he died. It's the only thing I have left of my family, of my past. He closed Elena's fingers around it. It's worth about $800, maybe more to the right buyer. Elena stared at the watch, then at Luke, her heart breaking. Luke, no. I can't take this. It's all you have. It's metal and gears, Luke interrupted. You're real. You're alive. You're fighting for something that matters. That's worth more than any heirloom. He cupped her face in his hands. Elena, I told you I'd do whatever it took to help save this place. I meant it. But your father would understand. Luke's voice was firm. He lost his ranch trying to hold on to the past. Maybe this watch can help us build a future instead. That seems like the right use for it. Elena's vision blurred with tears. She threw her arms around Luke's neck, the watch pressed between them. I don't deserve you. That's where you're wrong. Luke held her close. You deserve everything, and I'm going to spend as long as you'll have me proving it. They stood like that in the quiet barn, holding each other while the horses shifted in their stalls and the night settled around them. Then Elena pulled back, wiping her eyes. $800, she said. That still leaves us $200 short. Then we'll find it. Luke's jaw was set. We've got 10 days. We'll work every hour, sell everything that's not essential, beg if we have to. But we'll find it. The next morning, Elena rode into Dodge City with the watch. The jeweler there, a man named Goldstein, who'd fled persecution in Europe and built a new life in Kansas, examined it carefully. Beautiful piece, he murmured. Swiss-made, late 1840s. The engraving is exquisite. He looked up at Elena. I can give you $900 for it, not a penny less. Elena's heart leaped. $900 meant they were only $100 short, only $100 between survival and ruin. Sold. Mr. Goldstein counted out the money carefully, then paused. You're the woman from Redemption Creek, the one everyone's talking about. Elena tensed. I am. My wife and I, we left everything behind to come here. Started over with nothing but each other. People said we were foolish, that we'd never make it. He smiled. But we did. 20 years now, and we're still here, still fighting. He pushed the money across the counter. What you're doing, standing up for yourself, refusing to be controlled, that takes courage. Don't let the bastards grind you down. Elena left the jewelry shop with $900 and tears streaming down her face. $100. They needed $100 more. She spent the rest of the day in Dodge City trying everything. She sold her wedding ring, the one Thomas had given her, heavy gold with a small diamond. It brought $40. She sold the good saddle Thomas had commissioned, his dress boots, even the pearl necklace he'd given her on their first anniversary. Each item felt like shedding another piece of a life that had never truly been hers. By evening, she'd raised another $60. 40 short. So close she could taste it, yet still impossibly far. On the ride home, she passed the church on the outskirts of Redemption Creek. On impulse, she stopped. The building was empty, silent, but Elena walked in anyway. She sat in the back pew looking at the simple wooden cross hanging above the altar. I don't know if you're listening, she said aloud. I don't know if I even believe anymore after everything. But if you are, I could use some help. Not for me. For everyone who's believed in me, who's risked everything to stand beside me. They deserve better than to watch me fail." The church was silent. No divine answer came. Elena almost laughed at herself for expecting one. She stood to leave and nearly collided with Reverend Thompson entering through the side door. "Elena." He looked as startled as she felt. "I didn't expect to find anyone here. I was just leaving." She moved to brush past him, but he caught her arm gently. "Wait, please." The Reverend looked uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology. What I said at the hearing, the testimony I gave, it wasn't fair. I let the pressure from the church elders influence me. But the truth is," he took a breath, "the truth is you were right. About all of it. The cruelty of our expectations. The hypocrisy of demanding widows remain alone while men are encouraged to remarry immediately. I've been thinking about it ever since that day in the courtroom." Elena stared at him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm tired of being a coward." Reverend Thompson pulled an envelope from his pocket. "The church took a collection last Sunday. For the orphanage officially. But several members who were at your hearing insisted some of it should go to you as an apology, as support." He pressed the envelope into her hands. "It's not much. Only $50, but..." $50? Elena's voice came out as a whisper. She opened the envelope with shaking hands. 5 $10 bills lay inside. $50 meant she was only 10 short. Only $10 from saving everything. "I know it's not enough to solve all your problems," the Reverend continued, "but I hope it helps. And, Elena, for what it's worth, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. What you said about the cruelty of our conventions, about people claiming to care while stripping away autonomy, just changed how I think about my ministry, how I counsel people. So thank you." Elena could barely speak around the lump in her throat. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." She rode home as darkness fell, the $50 clutched in her hand like salvation. $10. She just needed $10 more. At the ranch, she found Luke in the barn, grooming the horses. He looked up when she entered, hope and fear warring on his face. "How much?" he asked. $50 short. Elena couldn't keep the smile from her face. "The watch brought $900. I sold everything else I could think of and got another $60. And then Reverend Thompson gave me $50 from the church collection. Luke were only $10 away." Luke whooped and spun her around, both of them laughing with relief and residual terror. $10. Such a small amount to stand between them and ruin. Such an enormous amount when you had nothing left to sell. "My saddle," Luke said suddenly. "It's worth at least $20. And my spare boots—" "No." Elena caught his hands. "You've given enough. We'll find another way." But as the days ticked down, 765, they couldn't find another way. Elena had sold everything of value. Luke had worked himself to exhaustion. The hands had contributed everything they could spare, and still they were $10 short. The night before the deadline, Elena couldn't sleep. She sat at Thomas's desk, staring at the numbers that wouldn't add up, no matter how many times she reviewed them. $19,990. $10 short of salvation. She heard footsteps and looked up to find Martha in the doorway wrapped in a shawl. "Can't sleep either?" Martha asked. "How can I tomorrow? We lose everything." Martha came into the room, settling into the chair across from the desk. "There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said weeks ago, but I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean, what you'd think of me." Elena looked at her housekeeper with concern. "Martha, what is it?" "When I was 16, I fell in love with a boy my parents didn't approve of. He was poor, unsuitable. They forbade me to see him, but we kept meeting in secret." Martha's voice was thick with old pain. "When they found out, they sent me away, to an aunt in Missouri, and they made me give up the baby. My son. I never even got to hold him." Elena reached across the desk, taking Martha's weathered hand. "After that, I came back home," Martha continued. "Married a man I didn't love because I was broken and thought I deserved nothing better. He died 10 years later, and I came to work for you and Mr. Thorne. And all these years I've been living half a life, going through motions, never really feeling anything. Martha. But watching you these past months, watching you fight for the right to choose your own happiness, it's woken something up inside me. Made me remember what it felt like to want something, to believe I deserved something. Martha pulled out a small cloth bag Elena had never seen before. I've been hiding this, saving it for I don't know what. Maybe for the courage to go find my son someday, though he'd be 30 now and probably doesn't even know I exist. She opened the bag and poured coins onto the desk, silver dollars, dozens of them glinting in the lamplight. $15, Martha said. It's not much, but it's yours if you need it, because you deserve to win this fight, Elena. You deserve to be happy. And if my savings can help make that happen, then maybe all those years of just surviving will have meant something after all. Elena stared at the coins through a blur of tears. $15. More than enough to cover the shortfall. More than enough to save the ranch. I can't take this, she whispered. Martha, this is your future. My future is watching you live the life I never had the courage to claim. Please, let me do this. Let me be part of something brave and real and worth fighting for. Elena stood moving around the desk to pull Martha into a fierce embrace. Thank you. God, thank you. They held each other while the grandfather clock ticked in the hall, counting down the hours until dawn, until the moment when Elena would walk into that bank and place $19,995 on Mr. Whitmore's desk, $5 more than the loan required, just to prove a point. Morning came cold and clear. Elena, dressed in her best black dress, pinned her hair with shaking hands and walked downstairs to find Luke waiting. He wore his borrowed suit, freshly brushed, and held his hat in his hands. Ready, he asked, as I'll ever be. They rode into town side by side with Jake, Tommy, and Miguel following behind. Martha had wanted to come, but Elena insisted she stay at the ranch. This was Elena's battle to finish. Redemption Creek's Main Street was busy for a Tuesday morning. People stopped to stare as Elena's group rode past. Word had clearly spread about the loan deadline. Some faces showed satisfaction, expecting to witness her final defeat. Others showed concern. And a few Elena saw with surprise showed something like solidarity. At the bank, Mr. Whitmore was waiting in his office. He looked tired, older than Elena remembered. Calvin Hensley was there too, leaning against the wall with a proprietary air that made Elena's blood boil. Mrs. Thorne, Mr. Whitmore gestured to a chair. I assume you're here to discuss terms of sale. I'm here to pay off my loan. Elena set her saddlebag on his desk with a heavy thunk. In full. With interest. Calvin straightened. That's impossible. You don't have... Don't I? Elena began pulling out bundles of cash, stacking them neatly on the desk. Bills and coins representing everything she'd sold, everything she'd sacrificed, every person who'd believed in her enough to invest in her future. Count it, Mr. Whitmore. You'll find it's exactly $20,000, the loan amount plus accumulated interest. Mr. Whitmore's hand shook as he began counting. The office fell silent except for the rustle of bills and the clink of coins. Calvin's face grew redder with each stack counted and confirmed. This isn't right, Calvin snarled. She's cheating somehow. That money, where did it come from? Did you steal it? I earned it. Elena's voice was steel. Every penny. By selling my possessions, by working my ranch, by accepting help from people who believed in me. All perfectly legal, Calvin, unlike your attempts to steal my property through intimidation and corrupt bank practices. How dare you? Enough, Mr. Hensley, Sister Hensley. Mr. Whitmore's voice was firm. He finished counting and looked up at Elena with an expression she couldn't quite read. It's all here. 20,000 exactly. He pulled out the loan documents and stamped them, paid in full. Congratulations, Mrs. Ward. You now own your ranch free and clear. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Free and clear. No debt. No leverage for Calvin to use against her. The ranch was truly, completely hers. Calvin exploded. This is absurd. You can't accept this. I demand you investigate where that money came from. The bank has been paid, Mr. Whitmore interrupted. That's all that matters. And Mr. Hensley, I think it's time you left my office. You're making a mistake. The only mistake I made was letting you pressure me into calling in that loan prematurely. Mr. Whitmore's voice was cold. Mrs. Ward has proven herself more than capable of managing her affairs. I suggest you accept that, and move on. Calvin's face contorted with rage. For a moment, Elena thought he might actually attack her, but Luke stepped forward, positioning himself between them, and something in his stance made Calvin reconsider. "This isn't over," Calvin hissed. "You think you've won? You're still a pariah, still a scandal. No respectable person will do business with you. You'll be isolated, alone. I'll be free." Elena's voice rang clear. "And that's worth more than your approval or anyone else's." Calvin stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. In the sudden silence, Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. "Mrs. Ward, I owe you an apology. I let myself be influenced by outside pressure, by Calvin's insinuations and the town's gossip. But what you've done paying off this loan, standing up for yourself, it's reminded me why I got into banking in the first place. To help people build futures, not tear them down." He extended his hand. "If you need anything going forward, credit advice, the bank is at your service." Elena shook his hand, barely able to process what was happening. She'd won. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, she'd actually won. Outside the bank, a small crowd had gathered. Sarah Whitlock stood front and center, her expression sour. But behind her, Elena saw other faces. Dorothy Cooper holding her daughter's hand, several ranch hands from neighboring properties, even a few of the church ladies who'd condemned her so viciously. Elena took a breath and stepped forward. "I've paid off my loan," she announced. "The ranch is mine, free and clear. And I want to make something perfectly clear to all of you. I'm not leaving. I'm not selling. I'm not apologizing. This is my home, my property, my life. And I'll live it as I see fit." "You're a disgrace," Sarah spat. "A scandal and I'm a woman who refused to be controlled." Elena cut her off. "And if that threatens you, Sarah, maybe you should ask yourself why. Maybe you should ask what's so terrifying about a woman choosing her own happiness." "Happiness." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "You call this happiness living in sin with a man half your age being shunned by decent society." "Yes," Elena's voice was firm. "I do, because it's honest, because it's real, because for the first time in my life, I'm not pretending to be something I'm not just to make other people comfortable." "She's right." The voice came from the edge of the crowd. Dorothy Cooper stepped forward, her face flushed but determined. "My husband died 2 years ago, and everyone told me I should be grateful for the time we had, should accept my widowhood gracefully. But the truth is," her voice cracked, "the truth is I was relieved, because he was cruel. He made me small, and I've spent 2 years feeling guilty for being glad he's gone." She looked at Elena. "But you made me realize feeling glad isn't wrong. Wanting more isn't wrong. We're allowed to want happiness, even if it doesn't look like what everyone expects." "Dorothy, don't," Sarah began, but another voice interrupted. "She's right." Mrs. Henderson, the butcher's wife, spoke up. "We've all been so busy judging Elena for refusing to conform that we forgot to ask if conforming was actually making any of us happy." She looked around at the other women. How many of us are truly happy? How many of us married because we loved someone versus because it was expected? How many of us have buried our own dreams and desires because being proper was more important? A ripple went through the crowd. Women exchanging glances, recognizing truth when they heard it. And Elena saw something shift. Not in everyone Sarah and her closest allies still looked outraged, but in enough people to matter. "What Mrs. Ward is doing takes courage," a man's voice said. Elena turned to see Reverend Thompson pushing through the crowd. "She's choosing authenticity over comfort, honesty over approval. And maybe, just maybe, that's something we should admire rather than condemn." "Reverend, you can't seriously," Sarah began. "I can and I do." The Reverend's voice was firm. "I've spent too many years enforcing rules that hurt people instead of helping them, that break spirits instead of healing them. Elena Ward has reminded me what faith should really be, about having the courage to live according to your conscience, even when the world tells you you're wrong." The crowd was buzzing now, people arguing in low voices. Elena felt Luke's hand find hers, squeezing gently. "We should go," he murmured. But Elena wasn't finished. She looked out at the faces surrounding her, some hostile, some supportive, most still uncertain, and felt words rising up from someplace deep and true. I don't expect all of you to understand, she said clearly. I don't expect approval or friendship or even basic respect, but I do expect to be left alone to live my life. Luke and I were building something real and honest and worth fighting for. And if that offends you, if that threatens your sense of how the world should work, then I suggest you look inward and ask yourself why. Building something. Sarah's voice dripped scorn. You mean living in sin, flaunting your immorality. I mean loving each other. Elena's voice softened. And yes, maybe we're doing it in ways you don't approve of. Maybe we're breaking rules you think are sacred, but we're not hurting anyone. We're just trying to be happy. Is that really so threatening? Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. For the first time since Elena had known her, Sarah Whitlock looked uncertain, lost. Elena took Luke's arm. Come on, let's go home. They walked to their horses while the crowd parted around them. As they mounted, Elena heard Dorothy Cooper's voice call out, "Thank you." When Elena looked back, Dorothy was crying. "Thank you for showing us it's possible, to choose ourselves, to refuse to be small." Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Then she and Luke rode out of town together, the afternoon sun warm on their backs. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing everything that had happened. When the ranch came into view, Elena felt something tight in her chest finally release. Home. It was truly hers now. No bank loans hanging over her head, no threats from Calvin, just 3,000 acres of Kansas prairie and the freedom to build whatever life she wanted. Martha met them at the door, her face anxious. "Well, we paid it off." Elena dismounted, pulling the paid loan documents from her saddlebag. "It's over. We won." Martha's face crumpled. She pulled Elena into a fierce hug, both women crying and laughing at once. The ranch hands gathered around, whooping and celebrating. Someone produced a bottle of whiskey that had been hidden away for a special occasion, and they passed it around, toasting their victory. As the sun set, painting the prairie in shades of gold and crimson, Elena found herself standing on the porch with Luke, watching the land stretch endlessly toward the horizon. "What happens now?" Luke asked quietly. Elena thought about it, about the battles they'd fought, the bridges they'd burned, the future they'd somehow managed to claim against all odds. "Now we live," she said finally. "We run this ranch together. We build something that matters. We show the world that choosing happiness over convention isn't just brave, it's necessary. And the town will talk. Some of them will never forgive us for refusing to fit into their boxes. But some of them, like Dorothy, like the Reverend, they're starting to understand, starting to question the cruelty of the rules they've been enforcing." Elena looked up at Luke. "We changed something today. Maybe not everything, maybe not enough, but something." Luke pulled her close, and Elena leaned into his warmth. The prairie wind carried the scent of grass and earth and possibility. "I love you," she said. "I can't live without you. Not because I'm weak or dependent, but because you make me more myself. Braver, stronger, more willing to fight for what matters." "And I can't live without you," Luke replied. "Because you showed me what it means to have a home, not just a place, but a purpose. A reason to stay and fight and build instead of always running." They stood together as darkness fell. Two people who defied an entire town to claim their right to happiness. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more battles, more judgment, more obstacles to overcome. But they'd face them together, and that made all the difference. Inside the house, Martha was lighting lamps, preparing dinner. The ranch hands were settling in for the night, already planning tomorrow's work. And Elena Ward no longer. Thomas Thorne's widow, no longer anyone's possession, but her own. Felt something she'd almost forgotten was possible. Peace. Not the peace of surrender or conformity, but the peace of living authentically. Of choosing courage over comfort, truth over approval, love over loneliness. She'd paid a price for that peace, had sacrificed security, reputation, the town's acceptance. But standing here with Luke's arms around her and her ranch stretching out before her, free and clear, and hers, Elena knew she'd made the right choice. The choice to be herself. Completely, unapologetically, defiantly herself. And that was worth everything.